Hello! In the following video, I will be sharing this Prezi which covers women's suffrage movement in the United States of America. This movement started in the 19th century and ended successfully early in the 20th century with the 19th Amendment. What do you mean by the word amendment? An amendment takes place when revision and changes in certain laws in the constitution of a government happen. In this case, we have an amendment related to women's roles and rights in the American society. Before we understand what happened in that movement, let's have a look at the status of women during that time. Women were treated as inferior to men, whether in their households or in the society. They had little social, economical, or political rights. In addition to that, the main purpose or goal of women was expected to be to get married, to start a family, and respect and obey their husbands. Therefore, her role was limited to this family building and caring for her own family. When it came to the economy, women had limited chances to get jobs, and even when they found a job, they would be paid little money, a low salary in comparison to salaries of men. In addition to that, they were not allowed to speak or to give evidence in court, that is, their voice did not matter. In addition to that, they were not encouraged to pursue higher education, to go to the university, or to pursue a career in case they had certain talents or skills. On top of that, after marriage, women also lost certain rights. For example, they could not own property, they could not keep their salaries or wages, or to sign a contract. When it comes to the political life, women did not have the right to vote in states like New York, Massachusetts, and New Hampshire, in addition to other states. Now, suffrage means gaining the right to vote, and this is why this movement was called women's suffrage movement, and it is considered as the largest democratic rights movement in the history of America. Suffrage movement had the political imagery. They had their own press, their own philosophers, and their supporters from organizers, lobbyists in the government, financiers, and fundraisers. However, there was definitely those who were with and those who were against women's suffrage movement. Let's have a look at those who supported this movement. They thought that half of the people in the country could not vote, and this was not fair. In addition to this, unprincipled and educated men did not have the right to vote as well. Similarly, even highly educated and responsible women were not represented, and for this reason they held this famous phrase or slogan, "No taxation without representation." They refused to pay taxes when they were not represented in the government. Those who were against women's suffrage movement actually thought that women's opinions were separate. They were not to be respected or taken into consideration. The women could not play a role in the nation's affairs. It was more local. Husbands already represented women, so they didn't need to vote or be represented in the government. And of course, they were afraid of this change in the system. They thought that it was dangerous and it might cause this instability in the country. Finally, women were not capable of defending their own country. They could not be soldiers and be part of the army. In addition to that, some believed that women consisted of emotion, not logic. That is, they follow their emotions and feelings. They cannot reason here as a verb. They could not reason or think logically. Another thing is that they were considered less intelligent than men, and they weren't able to represent their own countries and have full citizenship. Finally, some believed that equality of both sexes would result in competition that the society did not need. On the other hand, there were people who thought that politics would corrupt women. They would destroy families, and her involvement in politics might affect the family's status and cause a human race dying out. They were that extreme. And finally, they considered them too emotional to make certain political decisions related to the future of the country. So they trusted the woman to take care of a household, to raise her children, and take care of her husband. However, women were not fit for being a part of the system. Let's look at the timeline of the suffrage movement. In 1848, that's mid-19th century, it started in New York, in Seneca Falls, where the first Women's Rights Convention took place, and they only had 68 women and 32 men sign a declaration which consists of certain resolutions related to voting rights and equal rights of women. 2 years later, they had another convention which had more than 1,000 participants. Now let's look here. Around 19 years later, this association grew bigger and more powerful, and tried to have the congressional amendment to the Constitution. Same year, we had certain figures who focused on gaining voting rights to begin with, and then moved to other rights. The first suffrage law was passed the following year, and women began to serve on juries in the territory. As you know, the process of revising and changing a certain law takes some time, but this was the beginning of change. Now let's look here, 1896. That's several decades later. There were the colored women, that is African American, or what we know as black women, got involved in this suffrage movement, and they had more than 100 black women join the club and fight for their own rights. Now we're moving to the 20th century, 1903, where the National Women's Trade Union League was established, and this league advocated, that is, called for improved salaries and better working conditions for working women. 1917, World War I. Another change was happening here is that women started entering the workforce. Why? Because men were deployed in the army and left to war. For this reason, they worked in factories and in the government. They also served as nurses in the Navy or the Marines. And finally, the suffrage movement gained support from the public and the government. That is, the public believed that women could play an important role in their societies. 1919, that is post-World War I, finally the amendment took place, and it was passed by the House of Representatives and the Senate, that is similar to the Parliament here in Lebanon, and it was sent to the states for ratification, that is for being edited and changed. 1920 finally passed. The Women's Bureau of the Department of Labor is formed. Department of Labor, that is similar to what we have here as the ministry. They created or formed the Women's Bureau, and this office followed the process of establishing or passing the 19th Amendment, which was signed by the law of, and as a law by Secretary of State Bainbridge Colby. What happened next? The 19th Amendment showed that citizens of the United States will not be denied the right to vote based on their gender, and the Congress will protect that law. Women now were involved in politics. They voted for candidates. They could be represented on a local and a national state level, and they began their journey to political equality. Other benefits included increasing entrance rate, into higher education, they could join universities and certain jobs that they were prevented from joining before. The wage gap between men and women narrowed down, that is, their salaries increased, and finally they were able to inherit their parents or their husbands, and they were able to get a divorce. This change led to a new image of women as a whole. Women gained confidence, gained this independence, and they were able to represent themselves by this change in fashion, lifestyle, jobs, sports, and parties. American women emerged as more powerful and more confident. Therefore, the 19th Amendment showed the acceptance of the new women who can be part of the nation, whether politically, economically, or socially. They can stay longer in school, they can focus on their education, and finally they have the right to choose how to lead their lives. The right to choose a husband, the right to find a job, the right to pursue their education, the right to pursue a career, the right to vote, and the right to represent their own people in the government. These are the works cited. I will be sharing the link to this Prezi if you would like to have a look at it. Thank you for listening, and see you soon.